Welcome back to another virtual tasting with Binny's. I'm Pat from the Whiskey Hotline. Our wine educator Alicia is here with me again. Brett is also here in front of some unknown bay with Dan Farber on a kayak. Our friend Dan Farber's back. Jake Parrott's back. Jake, thank you for doing this again. Welcome people on Facebook land. If you got any questions, type them in and we'll get to them. Alicia's over here at the Facebook page for us. So that being said, anytime you have a question today, please use the Q&A function at the bottom there. And we're going to be talking about a bunch of really cool spirits. I don't know how many of you are tasting along at home. We have them open in front of us, and it is quite the aroma here in the tasting room over at Lincoln Park. There's a lot of stuff going on in these glasses. Jake, welcome back. Where do you want to start?
Well, good evening, everyone, and happy almost New Year. Hope you had a holiday as restful and as isolated as you wished. Today, we're going to kind of culminate what we've done over the last two sessions and talk about kind of a lot of other botanicals that have also been used in alcohol over the years. And then at Pat's request, we're going to talk a little bit we're going to put theology back in mixology for a little while. And it might be one that you'll have to go back and rewatch because it's a bit of an eye chart even for me, but we're gonna talk a little bit about mixing some stuff together. Maybe go into it more at a later date. But yeah, so to recap where we've been, the first session, Vermouth 101, talking about wormwood and all of its uses in wine. Wormwood is herbaceous, intensely herbaceous. It has an earthy harmonic if you use a lot of it, which we'll talk about in a moment. And I find, at least, that it stimulates primarily the tip of my tongue. More on that later. We talked about gentian. We talked about Americano, the wine bittered with gentian category that's endemic in Italy. Gentian, more earthy, more vegetal tasting, kind of like the heart of a head of lettuce, if you will. And I find it burrows right into the middle of my tongue. And we talked about quinine. We talked about quinquina and quinato, the classic wine-based things bittered with quinine from France and Italy, respectively. It's a bark. It's modern. We talked about how its rise mimics the rise of CBD today. And it's a dry spice character, and I find it stimulates all the way at the back of my tongue. And I realize I'm talking about tongue stuff, and we're going to get to it later because there's some explorations you can do on your own that you might find help you make a few more interesting new cocktails. With happy face from Brett Pontani.
Oh, how do you get rid of that?
I don't know, Brett. I think you got rid of it the last time you drew on my screen. So, I like your chances. But here's our old frog that we teased a couple of weeks ago. How do we use all this botanical stuff to make new cocktails? We're going to talk about that at the end. So there's a little teaser, and there will be a frog with a very long tongue as a very big part of that. All right, so let's roll right into some new botanicals for us as a group, and we're going to start with the Cardoon. One of those vegetables that if you have an Italian grandmother, she probably likes a lot more than you do. Cardoons are related to artichokes, but you eat the stalk rather than the flower. Some Cardoons, the flower actually looks almost like an artichoke flower. But there's a very special type of Cardoon, most traditionally grown in Nizza Monferrato, which is an area in the southeast of Piedmont in Italy. Where they'll actually kind of grow it like white asparagus. You have to bend the stalk over and then bury it to keep it from developing a lot of chlorophyll. Chlorophyll has a really harsh green bitterness, whereas a Cardoon that's been hunchbacked sort of has this more sort of gentle, earthy bitterness. Think about the flavor of celery for chlorophyll and celery root for hunchbacked Cardoons as a comparison. And so they're a little more elegant. The Piemontese cuisine is very elegant, almost French in some ways. And the hunchback Cardoon is a big part of that. It's one of the things you dip into bagna cauda. It's one of the things that you would make into a gratin during the winter. And one of the things that in said gratin, you might shave white truffles over. Now, our chief botanical correspondent, Dan Farber, has Cardoons growing in his garden, and so we will see if he can show them to you live and in the flesh with his surgically repaired shoulder.
That plant right there, which takes up most of my field of view, is a Cardoon. Actually, if I had two hands, I'd actually open up the door and take you outside and show it to you. But it's pretty much indistinguishable from an artichoke at this point in its career. The artichokes that are out there are much smaller. And when they bloom, obviously the Cardoon doesn't produce as large and as fleshy a thistle flower, but they're both thistles. And I guess Cardoon still grows wild and still grows as a wild weed or wild herb, the native one in the Piedmont as well, right?
Yeah, and they can get really, really tall. I mean, in South Louisiana, they can grow in hotter climates. They can get really tall.
And Dan, is that something?
3.5 feet.
Is that native too? So is that something that's native? Is that something that was grown in Northern California, Dan, or did you bring that in from somewhere else?
Well, I planted it. That's actually a Provençal form of Cardoon that we planted, and I just haven't layered it yet because Cardoon also for cooking is best after hard frosts, and our hard frosts here in February. So you want to blanch it for about 3 or 4 weeks, and then prior to using it. So that's right about now where we would start.
That's the hunchbacking we're talking.
That's the hunchback. I'm too lazy to do that. Next year I'll hunchback it because it's so beautiful in form. But you can also wrap it in burlap and tie it up and get it blanched.
Theoretically, you could bury it in straw like white asparagus too.
That's right. Or you could treat it like white asparagus.
Yeah.
But it's a great vegetable. I mean, it has all the flavor of a really nice of an artichoke, much more so than certainly the leaves of the artichoke. It just doesn't have that creaminess of the heart of the artichoke. But I actually prefer it to the artichoke because it's so much more versatile, as you just said.
You don't have to trim it so much. And if it's been well blanched out, you can eat it raw. Although it's certainly in a lot of classical uses, it requires careful simmering. Or you can put it in alcohol. And that's what our friends in Piedmont do. This is Amaro. It's the one wine-based thing we're going to talk about tonight. It is a Vino Amaro. The base is some grapes from Piedmont and some grapes from Sicily. So Chardonnay and Cortese from Piedmont and Grillo from Sicily. Some of the side aromatics you'll find in this, Blessed Thistle, which I always think sort of tastes like a traditional English hop. Licorice root, which adds an overall sense of bearing to it, means it doesn't have to be quite as sweet. Certainly plenty of folks refer to this as start Amaro. It's a great starter Amaro. But I find that when it's cold, and especially when it's diluted, that gentle earthiness, I find it on the middle front of my tongue of the Cardoon really does stand out. The acid of the wine helps it dance across the palate and add refreshing character to cocktails you make with it, even though it is on the sweet side. Certainly very nice to drink neat. In Piedmont, it'd be drunk after dinner. It loves cider, much like Bonal does. It loves ginger. And this is another good one to kind of use like an amber vermouth almost in a whiskey cocktail or maybe a brandy cocktail.
Jake, did they always use Grillo, the grape variety from Sicily, in this? Just curious kind of when that started, given that.
The company that makes this is a relatively big company, and so they do handle they handle wines as well, and so Grillo is inexpensive.
Yeah.
So it does help with the cost. This does see a little bit of time in oak as well, which again sort of reinforces the texture, but also actually reinforces a bit of the Cardoon flavor. So of everything we're going to taste tonight, this is probably the least focused on its botanical. But again, I find that its bearing on the palate, especially in a cocktail, really allows that botanical to show through. If you're ever in Piedmont in the wintertime, I highly recommend getting some Cardo with a bagna cauda or in a gratin, because it is beautiful eating and very much endemic to the region. The Hunchback Cardoon of Nizza Monferrato is recognized by Slow Food as well. So, Pat?
I was going to ask if this would then, I know the style of Amari that is made with artichoke is called carciofo, right? Would this be considered part of that because it's an artichoke adjacent type of thing, or no?
So I don't know if, I have never seen carciofi that go back to the era of wine base, which is not to say that they didn't exist. This dates back to the era of wine-based things back in the 1800s. Again, there's that line, and there's certainly spirit-based things before 1919, but they became much more popular afterwards. The producers don't think of this as a carciofo. They definitely are very proud of the Cardo Gobbo, the Hunchback Cardoon of Nizza Monferrato, much more so than trying to make an artichoke comparison. Carciofi also tend to be much higher in caramel.
Right, because this bears no resemblance whatsoever to, any of the other carciofi that we've had. So
yeah, you can actually taste the Cardoon here without salting it. If you salt Chinari, you will taste the artichoke. Though I learned that from a Chicago bartender. All right. So that's our one wine-based thing. So this is the one thing you'll want to keep in the fridge. After this, though, everything else you don't have to keep in the fridge.
Hey, we had an interesting comment from Bitter Boy about the use in Spain and Portugal of cardoons as a vegetable rennet for making incredible soft cheeses.
Yes.
I'm not sure I know what he's talking about.
Cardoon can be a source of a coagulant. And I actually did a tasting years ago at a store in Lexington, Kentucky, of all places, where we paired one of those Cardoon coagulated cheeses with Cardamaro, and it was like magic. So, all right, now we're going to get into the spirits. Now, spirit-based botanical expressions become a lot more common again after 1919. Alcohol got cheaper, transportation was better, so production began to be consolidated, not necessarily in big cities, but somewhere. So those two things together, meant that more producers were farther away from more wine, and alcohol was cheaper and was stable. You didn't have to worry about oxidation, and it extracted your botanicals in a very regular way. But you sort of can think of two styles of spirit-based botanical preparations, liqueurs here. Not talking about gin. Gin's a whole other deal. One is this kind of thing you think of when you think of the name Amaro, or a product named Amaro, and then the name of the producer, whether that's Amaro Nonino or Amaro Nardini or whatever. Kind of this house style, and you do see it in other countries, the Magenbitter of Austria and Germany, etc., where it's a lot of different botanicals and often very high in caramel, and so they don't all taste the same, but there is definitely, especially in Italy, a lot of gentian, a lot of orange, and a lot of just sort of this richness to them, and that's very classical for having after dinner, having alongside an espresso, something like that. Tonight, we're not going to talk about those. We're going to talk about things that were based around one botanical. And remember when we talked about Vermouth Americano and Quinquina, those products were sold because they had the botanicals in them, the wormwood in them, the gentian in them, the quinine in them. Same thing here, except they weren't wine-based. And so we're going to talk about, and we're going to talk about these kind of focus styles, A, because it's a bias of ours as a company. B, it's more interesting to talk about in terms of mixing as well. Now, the main consideration to think of when you talk about spirit-based botanical expressions is, do you distill any of it? When you take all of these things are going to include a maceration of botanicals in alcohol. Now, and something bitter. If you distill that maceration, you lose the bitterness. You get a lot more aroma, and we talked about aroma in cocktails. You get a lot more of the high notes, but in order to get the low notes back in, you've got to remacerate. And so if you do that well and you balance the expression of the distillation with the expression of the maceration, you can get something that's really engaging, but still focuses on a given botanical. And like I said, very much an appeal for mixing. Pictures here, that's an old business card for Solers. The bottom left is the old lab at Cappelletti, and the bottom right is the still on which Dolin Génépy is made.
Why'd they name it after a cheese?
It's a region. Solers is a region of the Auvergne. It's also an appellation for cheese and for beef. It's a race of cattle. Us of cattle. So if you've got a bunch of these things, how do you decide which ones you're going to buy and use and choose for a particular cocktail? How are you drinking them? Are you mixing them? Or are you drinking them straight? If you're drinking them straight, they don't necessarily have to be as intense, and that's something that some single botanical expressions they play off of. This is something that's very easy to drink. You might argue that Cardomaro is one of those. If you're going to mix, though, it's so important that anything you're going to mix with dilutes well. And when you don't have wine in the mix, where the dilution of a wine-based thing is going to be sort of saved by the texture, flavors, and acids of the wine, when you dilute a spirit-based botanical liqueur, it's got to show through. It's got to show through on the palate, in it both with enough concentration, but also in a predictable way. And it helps if it shows through on the nose as well, because it'll bring a lot to a finished cocktail. But
so is that
so important to remember? Sorry, Dan?
How would you contrast, let's say, using Banal versus Soler in that regard?
So it's two different. Those are two different animals in a lot of ways. So, can I defer on that for a couple slides?
Yeah.
Excellent. But I always talk when I talk with bar folks about tasting for mixology. Taste your stuff diluted. It'll show you how it's going to show through in a drink. This is something, if you take the WSET spirits courses, they ask you to taste everything diluted. There, it's to counteract the effects of the alcohol on the tongue. But it's so important when you taste for mixology, taste your stuff diluted. You got to be careful of caramel. Caramel, as we talked a little bit about in the vermouth episode, can overpower other flavors. It can create too much texture, too much thickness, but it also can create a lot of brownness, and you don't necessarily want all your drinks to be brown. Other things, other botanical expressions, other botanical liqueurs can be colored with other things, whether that's a deep, heavy green or a deep artificial yellow. And you've got to decide if that's something you want in your finished cocktail. We tend to, our producers tend to shy away from that kind of stuff. It's something that we really like. And I think it also helps with a lot of customers like Binny's who want to sell stuff that's pretty natural. And then, when you're choosing stuff, you always want to say, if I buy this bottle, I want to be able to drink it some way very, very simply. So if that's Cardomaro and ginger ale, or Alta Verde and tonic, something that I can just glug in a glass and it's easy and it's done. We're even going to talk about a few beer cocktails here along the way. So a few things to think about. Obviously, we'd love for you to buy many bottles of all of these and use them all the time, but think about these things along the way. Now we're going to start with things that use botanicals we talked about in the previous episodes. We'll start with gentian and we'll start with Solers. So the botanical here is Gentiana lutea, or yellow gentian. But here there is a distillation step. The gentian roots are macerated in alcohol and then distilled. And so if you have this in your glass in front of you, all the things you get on the nose here come from that distillation. White pepper, kind of a rich, more that inside of a head of lettuce character. It's really fascinating. Then that distillation is combined with a maceration, which adds the bitterness. And of course, bitterness is something you want in a cocktail. But what you get here with that distillation is, to me, is a great deal of dilutability, which means you can use this. I sometimes say you can use Solairs to haunt a cocktail. If you're making a sour, maybe a gin sour of some sort, a little bit of this is just going to add a ton of depth and finish. Talk about that more later as well. Now, the other thing, the world of gentian liqueurs, there's a few that come to the States. There's a few more in France. It's a tradition of the middle of France, the mountains in the middle of France. Solairs, as we get it for the USA, stands out though in that it's not colored. There's a little light straw color that comes just from the maceration of the gentian, but then also there's no vanilla or lemon flavorings added to Solairs. You'll see that a lot in France, a lot of gentians that are deep yellow from yellow number 5, and they'll have vanilla and lemon added to them. And it's a very good business decision by the producers that do that, because their Gentiane is thought of as a cafe drink. You drink it on ice, maybe a squeeze of lemon at a cafe. It's yellow so people can see it across the room. It's got lemon and vanilla, so it'll be delicious to drink just on ice. So it's a very good business decision. Here, where we're thinking a lot more about cocktails, it's a little bit less of a consideration for us. My favorite simple way to drink this is with a lemon soda. Ice and a squeeze of lemon is very classical. You can also use this in a lot of bitter drinks that also use Blanc vermouth. So we talk about things like a blonde Negroni, or I like the same drink with tequila. If you want to do something really sneaky, if you salt this, if you add a little salt to a glass of Solairs, you'll find it tastes quite a bit like tequila. And there's some pretty cool things you can do with that in cocktails as well. Matter of fact, I think this might be a good time to show you where you can get a lot of cocktail recipes with these things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great place.
So I'm going to run off of this and over to our website. So this is the House Alpens website at alpens.com. There's a lot of different ways to find product information, but I'm going to go to spirits, floral, herbal, Amaro. We're going to cover everything on this page tonight. And look at that, Solairs is the first one. So here's a normal product page. Bottle shot, label shot, some other pictures, something about the producer, a description of the product, easy ways to drink it. And then at the bottom, you'll see a few recipes, but then you'll see a click right here. This goes into our recipe. This pulls from our recipe database a whole bunch of drinks, all the drinks that call for Solairs. There's one that I wanted to show you in particular. It is called the Mountain Daisy. And this is a drink I came up with years ago for a low alcohol take on a margarita. And just taking the idea of Solairs and salt tastes like tequila, using Coca Americano as the orange component to it with the Moscato and the citrus in it, and then lime juice. And it's a heck of a drink, and a little bit lighter on alcohol than a real margarita. Another way to look at recipes is to go to our recipe database. There's about 500 recipes in here. There's a drop down here with all of our products. You can go and choose a product. So for us, we'll go down here to Solairs, and that'll pull up the drinks that have Solairs in it. So I know we haven't done a lot of cocktail recipes in the bodies of the presentations. Can't do everything, unfortunately, but that's where to get them, is right there in our website recipe database. Might come back and take a look at this later as well. All right.
Just a quick question on
Sure.
the maceration of the gentian. Do they ever, firstly, like how long is that happening for? And do they ever adjust it based on the intended market? Do some cultures have more of an interest in the bitterness than others?
So excellent questions. Thank you, Alicia. In terms of the length of a maceration, generally 2 to 3 weeks will get you to saturation. At that point, the macerate will start soaking back into the gentian. Most of these things will sit at equilibrium for a while. In terms of styles, there are various versions of a lot of major botanical liqueurs out there. Campari is sold at 5 or 6 different strengths around the world.
Mhm.
And it's no different with Solaires. In fact, there are 5 or 6 different Solaires in France. Some not necessarily with more gentian, but generally they'll change it by adding either more sweetness or the vanilla and lemon, things like that. So the idea is if you want to produce these things relatively inexpensively, you try to build up a big stock of the thing that everything is based on, and then other bottlings might just have something added to it. So we're actually getting kind of the mother Solaires, if you will, because we don't even have we did tell them that we didn't want it. We wanted it without yellow number 5. So
Well, thanks.
cool. I love these old images down here. All right, Génépy, Artemisia mutilina is a member of the wormwood family, the Artemisia family. And it is the high alpine. It is one of the most noteworthy botanicals of the high Alps. And Dolin, we know from vermouth, but the most famous product Dolin makes in France is Génépy. Génépy is a liqueur made primarily from that herb and a few other things. It is, again, made with a distillation of those herbs. We saw the still earlier. There's another great photo down here. And then a remaceration of the same herbs. So you get those high notes and those low notes, and you get this great concentration of flavor. Again, diluting this, you still get a ton of aroma as well as a ton of palate impact. It's clean, it's green. There will be things that are quite familiar here. Génépy is the green flavor in green chartreuse, for example. It's also the green flavor in Dolin Blanc. But what I find is when I work with this in drinks is what it's going to come, where it's going to come in on the palate. And so if you make a drink like a Last Word or another famous gin drinks that call for these sorts of things, you're going to taste the gin, especially if you use a great robust classic gin. Because this isn't there aren't so many different things going on in the Génépy to get in the way. But dilutability is it's important in all cocktails, but it's particularly important in cocktails with things that have both strong flavor and strong texture. And I think one of the best examples of that is when you take this and you put it in hot chocolate. Génépy and hot chocolate is a very, very classic après-ski drink when they're not just drinking it by itself. But this is great just on the rocks. Some people will drink it with tonic. There, I recommend a pretty dry tonic, like Fenimans or something like that, because the Dolin Génépy is on the sweet side. But
how strong is this, Jake?
This is a 45% alcohol. This is the highest strength thing we're going to talk about tonight. And again, it's meant to be warming and bracing on a cold day after skiing. So the extra alcohol certainly at least helps in the perception of that. Although alcohol is actually will cause your internal body temperature to go down.
This is one of those things, I think there are few spirits which I sort of refer to as being transportive. Like when you taste the spirit, you just are transported to another place. And Génépy, I probably on one hand, I can think of great spirits that have that capability to do that. And Génépy is really one of them. I mean, that aroma, the flavor, the texture of Génépy, it's hard not to just immediately be in the foothills of the Alps or in the mountains someplace. It's really one of the most evocative spirits I can imagine.
And is it anything like this grow in any of the hills in California or in the United States?
Well, we have a lot of native Artemisias in the United States, probably the most famous of which is sagebrush, but not like this one. Not really, not that I know of like this one. But, that's unfortunate in some respects that we don't have sort of the wild harvesting tradition that they have in Europe. I'm sure there are many things that could be done in the United States that aren't yet. But this is just such a classic.
I mean, just to wild harvesting in the United States, we could start with agave.
Okay, fair enough.
There's a question in the Q&A about the Last Word. Bitter Boy asks if you can use this in a drink like that. Yes, is the short answer. This isn't as. I find that that this kind of plays well with others in that drink really well. You're going to taste the gin more. It's not as sweet as green chartreuse, but it's also not as obtrusive.
Dare
I
I
find it works
say,
really, really well. Sorry, Dan?
if you took your portfolio, I would put it as a challenge. I would bet that if you took your portfolio and bench blended a bunch of things across the spectrum, you'd come up with a pretty dead ringer for another very, very famous liqueur that more typically goes into the last word. I mean, you have all the basic components in your portfolio, but expressed in a more clear form, I think.
You'd have to add more sugar.
You'd have to.
Sure.
But you can't miss that. You can't miss that green, that herbaceousness or whatever you want to, however you want to call it, that green note that's under. I mean, this blind, you can't miss that component of chartreuse.
And it's the and much as in chartreuse, it's the characteristics you get from the distillation, which is all the aromatic of that without any of the tactile bitterness. And then both have a maceration involved, which adds back in some bitterness and some more of that kind of firm, green, overtly green character. The difference is, of course, chartreuse has a wonderful secret recipe of so many things and is a lot sweeter.
No, but the dominant notes would include gentian, pine, vervain. I mean, a couple of things, right? A lot of which you have covered in a very classic, pure expression in the Hans Alpen's portfolio.
Yeah. The key to understand it, the way to look at this is that Génépy is the broad regional tradition. Chartreuse is this wonderful thing that comes from, used to come from a different magical place, and it kind of comes from this magical place, the magical place that it comes from now. The what the locals drink, if you will, is Génépy.
Do we do anything that you guys know of? Because the Artemisia, you talked about sage. Are we doing anything? Or have you seen anything done in North America by anyone with sage in much the same manner?
Art and the Age made a sage liqueur. I don't know if there was a
That's right.
though.
That's right. They did. Yeah.
I want to say there's a Colorado micro distillery, craft distillery, putting sagebrush or some form of wild sage into a gin, but it's only, it's one piece of that botanical stew though. So I don't think anything as singular as that.
Yeah, and I think sage infusions would be bitter in a weird way.
Rush, but the other problem is like things that are already established as being accepted as safe are easier for people to produce with than just wild harvesting random herbs and then trying to make that claim. So it's a lot easier to use things that have been traditionally used elsewhere rather than
there's a list.
There's a list. Yep. There's a list.
You can get something else put on the list, but it takes a lot of work.
You can do that too. Yep. So
sticking with the Artemisia world, Amaro Alta Verde comes from a very different tradition. This comes from a tradition, an Adriatic tradition, so east of where Cappelletti is, of a primary preparation of wormwood. And here you get two notes. You get an earthy kind of tactile herbaceous bitterness from Artemisia absinthium, the same thing that's in vermouth. And then you get a fresher, greener kind of foresty characteristic from Mutolina, from Génépy. But this is just an infusion. So while there are aromatics, the aromatics are also supported by, there is aroma here. The aroma is also supported by a lot by the citrus in this. But this is bitter. This is definitely one of those things of, you would pour classically you would pour an Amaro like this for someone because they really wanted wormwood, and so the idea here was almost like you're doing this product with Cappelletti is almost the same reason that we did Solaires, just an elemental flavor of wormwood. That does make it very intense. So
this tastes like what would happen if Malort took a shower and shaved, and actually put on like a nice suit.
Yeah,
this is Malort in its Sunday best.
Yeah, exactly. Basically.
Malort in church clothes.
A little bit drier than Malort, I think. the easy way to drink this and really spread it out on the palate is to drink it with tonic. This is where you want a sweeter tonic. I like a grapefruit peel or a squeeze of lemon or both in an Alta Verde and tonic. And it really has its home in long sour drinks. So, you know, a lengthened gin sour, a Collins type drink. And what it's going to do is it's going to give you a lot of aromatic play on the palate, and it's going to give you a very long finish. But one of my favorite, really simple ways to do it, I am going to call myself out here. I am not a fan of cloudy IPAs.
It's beer for children.
Milkshake IPAs. I know there are some people on this call who are more tolerant of milkshake IPAs than I am. I am not a fan, but I find that if I add a little bit of Alta Verde to a glass of one, it sort of turns into a real IPA. And that's kind of a cool effect that I don't really understand. I don't really understand why, but I'll let Brett talk about that that experiment maybe at a later date.
You just carry around like an airplane size of this, and then if you go to friends and they serve you a hazy IPA, you just kind of dump this in and tolerate it.
Yeah, pretty much.
If you go to France,
and they're distracted, put a top in.
If you go to France and get a hazy IPA, make sure that you got on the right plane. And you're in the right
All right, now let's
I've never
dive
seen
in.
an Amaro that looks like that before, Jake.
I mean,
this was interesting.
Well, so that's
Yeah.
another important point here, right? Amaro doesn't mean brown; it just means bitter,
Mhm.
right? Amari are brown because they have caramel in them. They have caramel in them because Italians like it. What I think I said this a few weeks back. One of our favorite things about working with Cappelletti is that they genuinely love bitter.
Mhm.
Well, and you know what? We asked, and how did they? What the process? Because you've talked about the sort of maceration distillation. What was the process to get this?
This is
Because
just
the one thing,
This is
maceration, because
just maceration. The rest of these are all going to be just maceration.
because that is also how Malort is made, which is 100%. They're not doing any redistillation. It is interesting.
If you
how
redistill it,
close
you're going to
this
get something that
actually
tastes
looks.
more like this.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And you still get some nose. You just get a different nose, and you get a nose driven by more different things. Now, Dan is holding up an Amaro that is not based on one botanical. It is a melange. It is the stomach bitter made by Herbarista Cappelletti. It's called Elixir Novasalis.
We love that.
The old marketing tagline for Elixir Novasalis is, in translation, "When you need it, you need it."
I've needed it.
Tubuole,
Like,
tubuole. So more on that perhaps at a later date. All right, now let's move into some more botanicals. Violets. Who doesn't love violets? Viola odorata is the violet we're talking about here, and there are many strains underneath that, including the March violet and the Queen Charlotte, things like that. This is another one of these things that was kind of a sign of wealth, going back at least to Roman times. And Dan, probably you can talk about this more than I can, but you know, an ephemeral flavor, but a flavor that can be concentrated. You see it in syrups, you see it in candies. We love the folks at Leone. They make beautiful, beautiful single botanical pastille, or whatever the word for pastille is in Italian. But then one of the things that was sort of a hallmark of what I call the Baroque era of cocktails, the last era of cocktails before American Prohibition, was the use of Crème de Violette, a very sweet liqueur made of violets in a thing. Now, violets are surprisingly bitter. I guess they're not, when you look at the plant, you're not surprised that they are bitter. But when you think about using Violette in a cocktail, don't forget that it is also quite bitter.
you know, but both parts of the violet are used, like much less so nowadays, the flowers actually than the leaves. All parts of the violet are edible. We used to, as a kid, I used to collect them for salad greens, frankly. But the dominant note there is ionone, right? It's a real classic, very dominant aroma, and very, very hard actually to capture. It's a super delicate thing as well.
Yeah.
And your salads growing up were much different than mine.
Well, I just
What
was
Dan's not telling you is he put
rooting
it
around in the
put it in
dirt. more
ham
than-
salad. We do have a creme de violette. It is made at Distillery Perkart in Steyr in the center of Austria under a label called Rothman and Winter that we work with Perkart on. This is it's a creme. It's very sweet. That was the fashion of the time, but it also does balance all the bitterness that violets bring. To me, people talk a lot about the aviation cocktail. For a lot of people, that's sort of their first sort of non-martini Manhattan cocktail as they're learning about cocktails. And that's great. It's a great drink. Again, a drink that I think really, really shines with a big, robust traditional gin in it. To me, though, Crème de Violette is all about sparkling wine. It's all about making an easy drink to start anything where blue is okay, whether that's a shower or a baby shower or a wedding shower or Mother's Day or pretty much anything.
Is that like a louche?
Sorry?
Does it louche?
No, that's an aviation, so it's been shaken with lemon juice. The picture is an aviation. No, it doesn't louche. But here's a really key point. This last bullet here. When you decide you want a citrus peel as a garnish for a drink, you have three choices. Lime peels are bitter and they're a little bit tricky. They don't give off a lot of oil. So lemon, orange, and grapefruit. Grapefruit oil is the most volatile and the most bitter of those oils. So when you smell grapefruit oil, it goes up your nose, it goes down and starts to stimulate the surface of your tongue. And it starts to stimulate bitter receptors on your tongue. And you can only taste so much sense so much bitterness at one time. So when you then put the drink in your mouth, you won't taste as much of the bitterness of the drink. And we talked about a little bit about that when we talked about Coqui Rosa a couple weeks ago. But this is one of those drinks, especially Violette and sparkling wine, where grapefruit peel is absolutely your friend. I know people don't always keep grapefruits around. Maybe people can't eat grapefruits for whatever reason, but grapefruit peel really, really is your friend for a lot of things. A lot of drinks involving Solaires, a lot of drinks involving Crème de Violette, a lot of drinks involving Sfumato, which we'll talk about here in a little while.
Is that maceration and distillation as well?
No, just maceration. We are done distilling botanicals tonight. Everything else is maceration. And then this has a bit of color added to it because the blue drinks have got to be blue.
Okay, and this so that does have color added, and now that's a brandy base.
Yeah, it's clear grape brandy. It does help a bit with aromatic texture, and it's inexpensive in Austria. All right, rhubarb. So we're not talking here about pie. I do enjoy a rhubarb pie if I don't have to prep the rhubarb. Or a rhubarb fool. So I never can poach the rhubarb stalks in the syrup and get them to hold their shape. And so whenever I want to do anything with rhubarb, I'm just going to cook it into a mush and then do something with it. So I have made rhubarb fools in the past where I fold the mush into pastry cream. But enough about me and my terrible pastry.
Well, see, rhubarb is also, as a child, talking about Dan eating violet salad. One of the things that we used to do when we were kids, we had rhubarb growing all over the fields in northwestern or northeastern Indiana, where I grew up, growing in our garden and all over the fields. And that used to be a regular snack during the summer. We would just go and pull a ton of rhubarb out of the ground and get a small bowl of sugar and just dip it and eat it.
Dip it in the sugar, yeah.
Dip it in the sugar and eat it up until you started getting into the heavy green part and then throw the stalk away.
Yeah, that'll make you very sick.
Yeah.
Here we're talking about the root, and Rheum officinale as well as Rheum palmatum, mainly. The root of rhubarb is fascinating. It is the smokiest thing you'll ever smell or taste from the natural world. It is almost a pure smoke note, but it doesn't have, unlike wood smoke, it doesn't have its own tannin. So it isn't an astringent, it just has this incredible smoky aromatic. Because of that showiness, it was one of the first botanicals used for focused botanical liqueurs. It also has certain effects that, again, I'm not allowed to talk about, but you can Google them. They're mostly around pooping. But that distinctive smokiness, that intensity, is something that can be quite stimulating. It can be quite intense. It's often used as a support botanical because it just adds a little edge to a bunch of other things. There's a bit in Coqui Vermouth de Torino. There's a bit in Amaro Pasubio, which we haven't talked about yet. We'll have to figure out
That's a great one.
that in somewhere. But and it is the star in Amaro Sfumato, also from Cappelletti. Sfumato is a term of Renaissance art, which I'm happy for someone else to explain because they probably can do it better than me. Dan, do you want to talk about Sfumato? You seem like a Renaissance art guy. I can talk about it.
It's the melding of light and dark and how it gets a bit of that smoky tone.
Yeah, it's a little bit of Caravaggio, a little bit of some other stuff. There are a few other things in this. There's a little bit of blueberry and stuff, but this is mainly rhubarb root, and it is extremely low in caramel. It's dark in color, but that's from the rhubarb tincture. It's so important. Virtually every other Rabarbaro in the market in the world is a high caramel Amaro, and many times the caramel actually overtakes the expression of the rhubarb because that's what Italians like. I love this by itself. I love it with tonic. We've had it. It loves grapefruit in all its forms, even grapefruit IPAs. But when you mix this with an American straight whiskey, a bourbon or a rye, you get something that you can't get away from, that idea of campfire. And that's fun for just a little old-fashioned take, for a sort of American stinger take, half bourbon, half Sfumato, or for a simple sour. It's also a lot of fun to use this in tiki drinks, but I'll leave that to an expert to talk about. But Sfumato is, I think, a really great example of how Cappelletti's history as an herbalist melds with its technical ability today of putting together their old recipes, but getting them out very, very expressive. These guys had made wine-based Rabarbaro in the past. It's not as expressive, not as intense as the spirit-based one is.
Well, so, is there other, because there is almost like, and maybe it's just me, there's almost like a cacao element in like the middle as some of the
that's
the sweetness.
Yeah, this is on the sweet side, but the botanicals stand right up to it.
Yeah. Now, Jake, question about this. So this is spirit-based, but would you say this thing has a kind of distinctive shelf life once you have it open?
No, I think it's pretty much good. It'll throw a little sediment because it's not that filtered, but we love that when it's Madame Varnelli talking about it. So
yeah, because I was telling Alicia about this earlier, and I said, yeah, we're going to taste this awesome, Rabarbaro, Sfumato. But the last one I had was looked like mud. I mean, like really.
A couple of early batches.
Like this looks unfiltered, but a couple early batches. I thought maybe because I had it open for too long. I don't know.
No, it's a couple of early batches were, shall we call it, nigori, if you will. But yeah, no, they've figured out the filtration. I mean, it's look, we much like our friends at Varnelli, we want as much of the botanical in the bottle as we can, and sometimes that does mean that there's a bit of schmutz.
No, and a little bit anticipating maybe the next thing you're going to talk about. There are times where it's not filtration; it's actually just like in wine, right? I mean, you could filter great wine all day long, which you wouldn't want to. It's still going to throw the sediment, right?
And if you get Sfumato really cold you leave it in a cold car for a week, it's gonna cloud up a bit.
And Nocino's going to throw a sediment like crazy.
Yep. That's true. Speak of the devil. Juglans Regia. Over to you, Dan.
Well, I mean, you've got the before and I've got the after, right?
Yeah. So these are eating walnuts, but before they get to where you can eat them, essentially. And this is something that is made all the way from the south of France to Croatia, and perhaps even farther east, at least back when more of those cultures drank alcohol. The key is not, I mean, and pretty much everyone starts it the same way. They pick the green walnuts in June, July, whenever they're not quite ripe, put them down in brandy, take them out in November or so. It's what else you add to it in terms of other botanicals and how you sweeten that really creates this difference in styles. And I know it's going to be a real shock to all of you after me saying this about 25 times already over the last 3 weeks, but the Italian ones are really sweet.
Mm-hmm.
And Italians like to put citrus in walnut liqueur, and that adds an extra layer of astringency, which means, wait for it, more sweetness.
Citrus. Do they citrus early when they batch it together early, or citrus after it's finished?
Generally, most of your side botanicals will go in the last month of maceration.
Okay.
So Nux Alpina is another product from Perkart in Steyr. So, and this is one, Austrians, and this theme goes over and over again. We talk about Cappelletti, which is from the Alto Adige, sort of the German Italy, if you will. And then here in Austria, the taste there is not for as much sweetness, for more bitterness, for more of a nervosity or botanical characteristic. And so this is drier. It's got a little bit of spice and bitter in addition to the walnut, but you get this really great kind of, I always describe this as sappy expression of walnut on the palate. And the sweetness is moderate. Classically, this would be a digestif. I think a lot of folks now will add a dribble of this into a Manhattan type drink. It's one of the many different ways people describe a black Manhattan. Use the name Black Manhattan. It's really killer in coffee and in coffee drinks. I don't know if anybody's still doing Dalgona, but if you want to make boozy Dalgona, this would be a great way to do it. And it's pretty awesome with ice cream as well, or poured right on. There aren't that many walnut liqueurs available in America. There's some things that are labeled, as if they were walnut liqueurs that are actually imitation. It says so on the bottle. And I think this one is a really powerful and again, that sappy character. It really feels like it came from a walnut.
Right. Well, there is like a ginger, there is like a root sort of character to it. Like you just said sappy, which made me think I wanted to say cinnamon. That's not exactly correct, but there's like a sarsaparilla.
Yep.
There's almost like a sarsaparilla character underlying in the middle, which would make you think of sarsaparilla or super, super dry root beer.
Yeah. And that's very much an Austrian taste.
And they have this balance, right, between this very aromatic kind of top note, which leaves the glass, and the sort of base notes of that beautiful bitter, nut, that green nut. And you will not get that color reaction unless you do include sugar in the maceration. It's one of the few things I know of, or I've tried, that you actually have to have some amount of sugar to get it to go. Yes, the Italians use more than that in many cases, a lot in many cases. But having a beautiful sort of balanced sweetness and bitterness is.
Well, Dan, did you change? Because if you from the outside, Dan owns Osakalis, just brandy distillery in Northern California, in Santa Cruz, and this is what you held up earlier is your Nocino. Have you, as you make it, do you change it each year when you make Nocino, or have you pretty much settled into the same recipe? Because the bottle, just for folks looking, the bottle he held up earlier was that Nocino.
Yeah, but it was the same size bottle as Jake showed, and Jake showed sort of exactly the way it starts out, and I was just sort of showing the way it ends up. I was given the recipe by a dear friend of mine who I went to school with, and her father owned an apothecary in Rome, and so we just sort of used their traditional recipe. But it's something we've always made and never really tried to commercialize because it's so underappreciated in the United States. But as more and more people discover it, it's hard for me to imagine that you wouldn't fall in love with this, especially if you like anything bitter. It's just a classic and it's gorgeous.
Well, how much have you made? How much do you normally make in a season?
It's really a lot of work to make this stuff. So we made, this year we will produce about 20 gallons, a little less actually, after all the maceration is done and everything.
Do you sell it?
What?
do you ever sell it or?
We're intending to. Yeah, there's a colleague that we're all friends with who sort of asked us, but we age ours for quite a bit of time. It really changes with aging, and it's not to say the youthful green walnut is vivacious and gorgeous and has a certain character to it, and then older and older Nocinos take on a kind of different kind of nuttiness to them.
Different flavor, but sort of what happens in Umeshu when you age it. I find that more youthful Nocino is more useful for mixing.
I think that's really true.
Which is, and again, the world we live in America is very much people are going to, I think a lot of people buy these things to make cocktails with them. And in this case, much like with the Génépy, it's a great kind of two-way shot. You can mix with it, you can drink it. Amy asked
for reference. Yeah, well, I was going to say for exactly that question, Jake. For reference, Dan, how many vintages of Nocino do you have now at Osacalis? How many different vintages do you have in bottle?
I have stuff going back 25 years now.
Wow.
But if you ask my son whether this is something we should go into commercially after he's sat days on end, cutting walnuts, he would rather do something else. Although he does love the Nocino. These products are a lot of work. I mean, even mechanized, to take in the walnuts, it's a very short time window that the harvest has to be done, and do the preparation and then the maceration. And I mean, it's quite amazing the ability to sort of offer a Nocino at a price point and a quality level that warrants use in cocktails. That's really, we could never do that.
Yeah, we talk about immature walnuts here, but there is such a thing as too immature to use in Nocino, and it's a very, very tight window.
Yep.
Well, especially because they can sell the walnuts fully mature and also make money. So
That's right. Although the high production walnut trees in slightly warmer areas than the middle of Austria tend to be a lot of the walnut.
But remember, like almost all the things that we talked about tonight, or Jake talked about tonight, really are still predominantly like Savoyard, even though Salers is Auvergne and stuff. Green walnut liqueur is right there at home with Génépy, there at home with Bonal. That is sort of the home base,
Well, I mean, I think you find walnut liqueur as far west as Provence and as far east as Croatia. I mean, it's wider. One of the things that is just absolutely endemic.
Well, and a lot of craft producers in the United States are also doing Nocinos as well. There are a number of commercially available, including one made with walnuts from Morton Arboretum here in Chicago. Our friends at Whiskey Acres are doing a Nocino, and their harvest is coming from the Morton Arboretum, and they're working in conjunction with the Morton Arboretum and making a really nice Nocino that we get every year in the fall.
Real quick, we have a couple questions. Paul had asked in the chat if you have any advice for the visual aspect of Sfumato and cocktails. He finds that it separates a lot as it dilutes. I don't know what to tell him with that because I just tend to drink it straight and I don't mess around with cocktails.
You mean in cocktails? I suppose he's meaning in cocktails on ice. I will say the most recent batches, I haven't had as big an issue with that. But it would certainly, it might be a situation where you might want to strain a drink that you might otherwise drink on the rocks if you're still getting that with your bottle. And then, of course, shaken drinks with it are less susceptible to that as well because they'll aerate and emulsify. But,
and I saw another question about shelf life on Nocino. I mean, like any other liqueur, it should be fine. I mean, once it's open, you need to be aware of oxidation with it. But
oxidation or loss of higher.
That's why I asked Dan about it. That was sort of the tie-in because Amy said she had a bottle from 2004, and Dan. Dan had mentioned that he has stuff going back 25 years. So
but I mean, there's a whole market for vintage Amari out there now. I mean, they taste great after decades, assuming they've been stored properly.
Well, and if the bottle's open and if the bottle has a high sugar content, it probably it's not going to become harmful. It just isn't going to taste very good.
Right. A lot of things just go flat.
Okay.
All right. And our last botanical for the night is the tallest. and that's the Arola pine or the stone pine or the Austrian stone pine or the Swiss stone pine. And this is one of the trees in the Austrian Alps that grows at the absolute highest that trees can grow. Pinus cembra is the scientific name. It is a source of one of the many pines that can be used for pine nuts. But tonight we are going to talk about its fruit, which of course becomes a pine cone if it dries out. And look at the inside of that guy right there.
Wow.
This is, so Zerbens is to Austria as Génépy is to France in terms of après-ski drinking. And the timeline for making it is kind of like the walnut timeline. You grab the cones and you have to climb the tree like this crazy guy is doing. You have to climb the tree to get them. They're sticky, they're spiny. Then you throw them down to your drunk friends at the bottom of the tree, and then you got to cut them like this and get them down in wine brandy, and that gets you all your flavor and all your color and pretty much all your sugar. It is a miracle product in a lot of ways. And Zerben Schnaps, which is the name of the category, is it's like nothing else. It's not a pine needle liqueur. That tradition is called sapin, and that's very much a Savoyard tradition. It is a pine fruit liqueur, so you do get some pine notes, but you also get mint and red fruit and a great texture. Even there's some certainly some sweetness here, but a great kind of rich texture, a nice balanced bitterness, not too much astringency, great dilutability, and great aromatics for something that doesn't have a distillation step. Simple way to drink it. I like it with ginger ale. I do know a lot of people would like it in tonic. This is my favorite sweetener for a toddy, especially a rum toddy or a Scotch toddy. It just brings so much depth to the party. You can add a little bit of this to a dry martini, and it creates this beautiful sort of haunting pink color in a drink that does not taste like a pink drink. One of the oldest cocktails, I'm going to go back to our website here. One of the oldest cocktails of the modern cocktails in our database is a Zerbens drink. If you're into cocktails, you probably know the name Jim Meehan. Jim Meehan got his really started getting prominence in the bartending world at a little place called Gramercy Tavern in New York, where he eventually was fired by Juliette Pope, and then he went on to do great things, of course, with PDT and whatnot. And the Hop to It Collins is his drink. He made it with Plymouth gin, but it's a it's a Collins essentially. So gin, a sweetener, citrus, but instead of lengthening it with soda, it's lengthened with an IPA. And by this we mean a regular old IPA. And this drink is just a stunning drink. It will always be in our cataloging database because I think it's a really cool modern use of Zerbens.
Well, and I think that people you have to try this for folks that don't have it in front of them. You have to try this to understand, because I think there's a misnomer when you see the label that people think it's just going to be piney, like you said, like that needle piney. But the pine character sits well in the back compared to, there's a certain mintiness to it. There's a dryness. I mean, there's a whole lot going on than just that pine character.
Yeah.
There's almost like a peppercorn, like a bright sort of black peppercorn.
Yeah, and there's dark kind of red fruits that Jake mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
They're definitely there.
Yeah.
It's amazing that you don't think of it as a sugar source, that the vast majority of sweetness, because this is decently enough sweet.
Yeah.
No, the fact that it's coming from primarily from the pine cone.
Yeah. Now, Hofer has to add some sugar, but generally just to equalize. So the producer here is Josef Hofer in Erdning, who's we did have another product with him in the past. I don't know if anyone, Brett, I don't know if you want to talk about Loria from back in the day, but
I vaguely remember it not doing much
let's just
with
say,
it.
go to Austria. It's a much better place to drink Kletzenlikör. than it is to bring it to the States. But Zurban's one of our very first products as a company. It's very much the Alpens and House Alpens in a lot of ways. All right, that's a lot of botanicals. And now for something completely different. Warning. This is not scientifically proven. This is a thing that works for me and works for some other folks thinking about how to mix botanicals together. It's a technique. It doesn't work always. It's just a thing. It's a thought model for mixology. Mm-hmm. But Patrick loves it.
I do.
So, this is so blame Pat if you can't deal with this. Believe me, I have to.
And by the way, compliment Pat, as Alicia, you could hear in the background, compliment Pat on that handsome beer guy beard that's going on.
That was, before I had to wear a mask every day at work. So the mask throw away, the ludicrous beard will come back.
So I would ask you, dear participants, to take a leap of faith. All of these things we tasted tonight, all the other expressions of wormwood and gentian and quinine that we've talked about, they stimulate, they burrow into the tongue in some way. They're not just sort of thick and rich or bright or just soft and aromatic. When you taste them, your tongue goes numb. But I find that a certain part of my tongue and a different part of my tongue goes numb with each of these things. And so a while back, I started to write that down. And I started to find that when I was thinking about cocktails, that if I sought out the idea that a mixture of different strong flavors, not all of them are botanical, a mixture of different strong flavors shouldn't all hit one part of the tongue or shouldn't overload one part of the tongue, I would end up with a drink that was more fun to drink, and a mixture that I could do as a relatively diluted drink or as a relatively strong drink, and both would come across to me really well. It's a little weird, but it makes sense in some ways, right? I think
it makes a lot of sense.
If you take Solaire, let's just say, for example, take Solaire's, which is gentian, and add Angostura bitters, which is gentian, right? And you put it in your mouth, and it's going to be like your mouth is going to be tired from tasting so much gentian, and you're not going to want to go and take the next sip of the drink for a while. Whereas a drink that doesn't make one part of your mouth super tired, you're going to want to sip it and go, and it's going to be more refreshing, and you're going to finish it and be ready for dinner and things like that. Or if you're a bar trying to make money, your guests will drink their cocktails a little bit more quickly. So that's sort of where I was coming from, but it is a leap of faith. So how do you do that? And this is something you've got to sort of learn how it's best for you. But we talk about chewing things. So let's say, for example, you wanted to map basil. So take a basil leaf, put it in your mouth, and chew it. But while you chew it, you want to make sure that you're grinding it into every part of your tongue from front to back. So you want to, and it's hard to do this while talking, but you want to, while you're chewing, run your tongue against your hard palate. So you make sure that every part of your tongue is touched by this thing. And then when you're done, you want to kind of reflect, maybe even breathe some air over your tongue and think, what part of my tongue is numb? What part of my tongue has been so overstimulated by this botanical that it's gone numb? And for me, for basil, it's sort of middle front. Now, you can do the same thing with an Amaro or with another botanical liqueur or wine. But you have to watch out for acid burn and alcohol burn. You don't want that numbness to come from too much alcohol hitting you. You want to focus on the botanicals. So when you are mapping something like that, dilute, dilute, dilute. Again, this is tasting for mixology. Your cocktails are diluted, so taste your components diluted. Note it down. And, it might take a while for you to get a feel for your own, or you can copy mine, which, a lot of people like. But I definitely have friends who have different tongue maps than me. Yes, I know. I just admitted that I have friends other than the people on this call.
And
Don't
that
worry,
you
the
love
feeling
tongue
wears off.
naps.
But so I'm gonna give you mine, which you can use until you run into a cocktail that you hate, and then you can come up with your own. But if you don't like it, it's Patrick's fault.
Look at that beard angle. Nice work.
World's greatest newspaper. I just got stuff from your Facebook page, brother. It's so here it is. Here's our frog. We didn't need a name for the frog. And again, a lot of times we get caught up in tongue mapping conversations, people talking about the sides of their tongue, or, what I find is when you're talking about this sort of bitter stimulus, it's from front to back. Sides are where acidity plays or other things, but basically front to back. So I want to call out a few things in particular. Oops. And I'm going to go out of slideshow mode so that I can click around in this. This is the big one, bourbon and rye, in particular, wood, oak, new oak hits me on the front of the tongue. And new oak, the tannin and bitterness of new oak is especially the relatively young whiskeys that are priced for cocktailing today, is a very important consideration when you think about making cocktails. We talk about light brown spirits. We're talking about spirits aged in older barrels, where the oak characteristics aren't as primary. So some other things, we talked about wormwood hitting the front of your tongue. So that's vermouth and Génépy and Alta Verde. I find Amaro hits kind of toward the front. The other one is caramel. I find, for me, caramel hits toward the front. That's a lot of things, especially a lot of things in a Manhattan, which we'll talk about in a minute. Headed toward the middle front, kind of your more complex vegetal botanicals, things like zerbens and sfumato, but also the anises, so aquavit, caraway, and then a lot of your gins that aren't really juniper-y gins. The easiest way I find to think about them from a cocktailing perspective is sort of at the middle front. The big middle is gentian for me. So Americano and Solaires, but also I think a lot of citrus liqueurs for me kind of hit right in the middle. Angostura bitters is gentian, so it's hits quite in the middle. The big one for the middle back for my tongue map is traditional gin. I was at Heyman's a couple of Novembers ago, and the distiller there had some juniper only distillates, and we were tasting them, and I got really reinforced with me how much when you distill juniper, so much of its flavor expression has nothing to do with pine. It's dark and oily, and for me, it really numbs the middle back of my tongue. And so if you have a gin, and we sell a nice suite of traditional gins from Heyman's, if you have a gin where you feel that expression on your tongue, then that's a gin you can make classic cocktails with, and they're going to show really, really well. The other thing that hits toward that part of the tongue, I find, are traditional hops, not high alpha acid hops, but traditional, East Kent Gouldings and Fuggles and things like that. And so a lot of traditional IPAs can be used in cocktails. But also there's the odd gin that has hops in it, and some of those actually perform well as traditional gins. And then the two big back things, quinquina or quinine, and then maraschino liqueur. So you go back and look at old cocktail specs, you see a lot of maraschino in drinks that also have vermouth. And there's a real natural balance, I find, on the tongue between vermouth and maraschino that is really, really fascinating. Or a wooded spirit in maraschino, such as in the fancy and improved cocktails of the time. So again, this is an eye chart. Feel free to go back on the Facebook Live and take a look at this again. We could spend an hour just on this. This is what works for me, and it helps me troubleshoot drinks. So like a lot of times I'll be presented a drink spec by a bar person, and it has Bonal in it, but it also has another gentian element in it. And I'll say, well, you want wine and you want that kind of brown character. Instead of using Bonal, which has gentian and quinine, with your other thing that has gentian in it, use Amaro, because it'll hit a different part of the tongue. And often I find that stretches the drink across the palate really well. Mm-hmm. So that's something that I get a lot of which one do I choose for a cocktail, Bonanza or Cardoon? The other question I get a lot is I get handed a gin and asked, what do you pair this with? Or what aromatized wine would you mix this with? And the tongue map is my way of answering that question. So it's fun for me. It's really fun for Pat, but
because I've seen it in action and I think it works. It's one of those things where a guy like me that doesn't spend a lot of time obsessing over mixology in any way. If I like this worked for me, and this as someone who does obsessively take notes about what I taste, this was an easy way for me to connect what I taste with how to use what I taste, and that's why I found it most helpful personally.
And for me, this goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning. We were talking about botanical liqueurs that are sort of a melange of a lot of things versus things that are very focused. Things that have a lot of different botanicals in them end up being sort of background notes in a lot of ways. And that's cool. I mean, I love, bourbon and Nardini Amaro. It's just sort of this rich brown tasting thing. But if you want something that has some punch to it, some focus to it, it's gonna inject itself into a cocktail in a very specific way, which I really, really dig. Now, what I find is that if you have a mixture that maps, you can finish that drink at a lot of different levels of sweetness and dilution. So that's kind of cool. You can take the same mixture. And one of my favorite examples is the Mété Rouge that we talked about 2 weeks ago, that pretty bitter quinquina with walnut husk as well. Take that and Calvados. You can make a stirred drink with that, or you can make a highball with that. You can make a stirred drink with another sweetener with that, or you can make a drink that's quite austere and long and refreshing. The Martinez is a great example of that. The Martini is an example of that. We talked about whiskey and Bonal a couple of weeks ago, and this drink, which is in our database from Ryan Fitzgerald in San Francisco, is a great example of that. But there are some drinks that don't work. Many of them are whiskey drinks, and many of them are old whiskey drinks that come from a time when whiskeys were much older when they were bottled, and they went into barrel at lower proof. And so the barrels they were raised in were for much older, much tighter grained wood. And so they didn't have quite as much of the primary tannin, primary vanillin of the wood-aged spirits that we have today. So that's some part of it, but not all. And as always, your mileage may vary. And the Sazerac and the Manhattan are two great examples of this. The Sazerac, I think there's a lot of argument that the Sazerac needn't have been balanced because the way it was sold at the Sazerac Coffee House was essentially as a shot. And so it was a bracer, if you will. And so deliberately not being something you sipped on or something harmonious that you could sip on was part of its cachet. The Manhattan is a little bit trickier, but Angostura bitters, man, really, really help a Manhattan. But also there are early Manhattan recipes that call for maraschino, which also really broaden that drink. Mm-hmm. Some ways to play around with that in drinks, and again, most of them are whiskey drinks. Use an older whiskey. You're drinking at home. Use a lower proof whiskey. That'll help with tannin as well. You're drinking at home. You don't have to pay $17 plus tax plus tip for the drink. So that's something you can do. You can use more sweetness. And sweetness can come in a variety of ways. You can use Coqui Vermouth de Torino versus Dolin Rouge in a Manhattan. You can add more syrup to a Sazerac. That'll give you more texture, and it'll kind of dull some of the harder impacts on the palate. My personal favorite is to use more dilution, especially in the Manhattan, but also in the Sazerac. Dilution separates flavors and allows each of them to kind of have their own time on your palate while you're tasting the drink. I'll often order Sazeracs at good bars and just add another ounce of water to them. And it's not the bartender's fault. It's just my own personal taste, but it works for me. And then again, what we talked about a few weeks ago, be careful how much caramel your modifiers have, especially in whiskey cocktails. It can create a great textured drink, kind of a great kind of ice creamy or dessert type drink. But if you're having a cocktail before dinner, if you're having a cocktail where you really want to taste all the components, just be careful how much caramel there is in your modifiers. So the plenty of ways to counteract some of the theory that doesn't work out quite as well here. What does it all mean? this is another way to think about balance in cocktails. Simply, it's another. You still don't want to drink that's super boozy or super sweet or super bitter, but this is another way to think about how how flavors work together. And it's a way to kind of troubleshoot a drink. If you have a mixture that you're trying and it's not quite working, this is another way to think about it. And hopefully your tongue map will be a little different because that makes people's cocktail tastes different. And that's a big part of the fun.
This seems to me to be the sort of liquid phase equivalent of what a great perfumer would be dealing with, putting together the volatile phase components of a great perfume. I mean, it really is analogous.
And it goes to a really key point about taste for me, in my brain, is that often what you taste or what you smell, is what's left over after all the rest of your nose or palate has been overloaded. Right. And I think cask strength single malt Scotch is a great scenario for this, where if your palate is overloaded with alcohol, but you get a great aromatic retronasally, like if you breathe out while keeping your mouth closed after you've swallowed or spat out, that's going to be the aromatic that you remember. And it's the same thing with cocktails. If you overload a part of your palate, you may not taste anything in that part of your palate. And that's so it's so much. And for parfumiers, it's the same thing. Like if you have 7 different floral notes, you're just gonna that part of people's brain will just shut off. Now in perfume, there's decay and temporal characteristics that are why perfumes are way more expensive than even cask strength single malt Scotch.
But aren't you dealing, like, that's fixatives, right? Aren't you sort of dealing with that with base notes and aromatic notes? And I mean, in the same way, I mean, it seems to me partially analogous with the sort of.
Yeah, there's much less of a market in perfume for focus, right? The market in perfume is for a mixture that creates a certain kind of energy, I think. But
there are exceptions, Violet being one of them, by the way.
That's true. That is true. But
And Farber,
people don't really mix their own perfumes at home.
Maybe we shouldn't take the analogy too far.
Yeah.
After the violets were used for the salad, the leftover were created into a perfume for the Farber family. They all smelled the same.
So I know that was a lot. We've been going now for an hour and 20 minutes. I really appreciate all of you, especially if you've had a chance to watch all 3 sessions so far. I know I hope we can do some more stuff in the future. I think we have a nice set of fruit things that we could do a session on.
I mean, we can always talk about that. It's we're getting into the months in Chicago where even if we could go outside, we really wouldn't.
Yeah.
So if tasting some more interesting things at home is in the cards, I think we might as well.
Sure. And then, Brett, I know you talked about doing some wine stuff, so we can talk about that. I
think that those are some fruits. Well, just some interest. I'm just interested on the wine side as much as anything, talking about the obsession starts with Carcavelos.
Yes.
And something that people are familiar with, again, sherry and port, and go down your list. And then somewhere much, much below that on people's radar screen would be something like Carcavelos.
I think there's a lot of different, I think with Carcavelos and Madeira, there's some technical sides of tasting that you don't get in port and sherry. And that's a big part of the fun for me, is that you get these incredible flavors and aromas and things you can pair with food, but also you get very different sense of why these things taste the way they taste.
Okay.
So there's there's sugarcane stuff, there's gin, there's all kinds of things we can talk about.
Well, I think that maybe fruits, maybe if we think about doing fruits, maybe we do fruits on the 4th.
Okay. We can do
and then decide if we want to go to do fruits on the 4th, and then on the 11th, maybe talk about Madeira and Carcavelos and a couple of things that are a little bit on the small side.
we all
Okay,
ought to be
well,
drinking more Madeira. All right,
yeah.
well, in that case, then next week, let's do fruits. Panel, we'll get together and figure this out. We'll put it up on the website, audience, and so you can taste along with us. Jake, thanks again. These are always so educational and so fun. Dan, thank you for regaling us with salad stories. Brett, I'll see you in a couple minutes, I suppose. So everybody else, thanks for joining us tonight. And you guys, I guess we'll see you next week. So
Really appreciate
cheers.
it. Have a great new year.
Bye-bye.
Happy New Year, guys. Happy New
Bye.
Year, everybody else. Thanks for
Cheers.
joining us. See you next week.
Cheers.
Ciao.
Ciao.